I've noticed a very intriguing phenomenon over the last 5 years.
Breaking news. The first death from coronavirus here in the United States.
PD vehicles drove into a crowd of protesters holding a metal barricade.
Is it going to take over the world one day?
It won't take over the world one day, because we can turn it off.
Okay.
You've got an on-off button.
Well, that's good.
I can't remember the last time I went 3 months without hearing, "This is a pivotal moment in our history. This is the most important election of our lifetime."
I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work.
Even then, I think it is fairly self-evident that the world's communal spine is shifting. But, come what may, regardless of what topic it is, what time it is, where it is, the most famous person to ever walk the earth always comes into the fray. And that's what I'm going to discuss today. So I think it'll end up being, an end-of-year kind of reflection, obviously centered around the very popular Jubilee debate video that I was in, where I debated Alex O'Connor. But I'll tie it into some bigger details and a bigger idea. Of course, how many months ago, it could have just been as simple as doing like a debunk on just the topics. But that would have been just too boring.
Hi, my name's Alex O'Connor. I'm an atheist and host of the Within Reason podcast. And today I'm surrounded by 25 Christians who, God willing, might be able to change my mind. My first claim is that suffering makes God's existence unlikely.
Right.
So crucially, I'm not saying that suffering is morally wrong.
Right.
Outside of the senses that I, as an emotivist, will just express an emotion towards it, that I don't like it. I'm not claiming that it's immoral, that it's objectively bad. What I'm claiming is that suffering is unexpected on theism. It's an internal critique. God can bring about the good stuff without the bad stuff.
Right.
Then there's no reason to bring about the bad stuff.
Right.
So what we have to show is why the bad stuff is necessary to bring about the good stuff. Otherwise, it's not justified.
Right. Well, could you say that the result of why we suffer is because of fall of man?
I would say not, because I don't believe in the fall of man.
Right, true.
But I also don't think that that explains non-human animal suffering. The big thing that I want to keep pressing is that the theodicies that we talk about, free will, fall of man, all of this kind of stuff,
Right.
I don't think applies to that deer with its leg caught under the branch that's dying in confused agony. What's this for?
Because it's an internal critique, I'm going to go to said internal sources. Fall of man or sin is alluded to by Jesus himself as a virus. In the same way that a person's entire consciousness suffers from a small isolated sickness, the entire world's consciousness would logically suffer from any amount of sin. And this is the problem with simply understanding sin without understanding its implications, because the implications of sin is that it affects everything. The prophet Isaiah makes a depiction about what perfection is supposed to look like. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf and the young lion, and a little child will lead them. For Alex, speaking about the animal suffering, this verse is so interesting because of the animal visuals. Speaks about how there was supposed to be, and then will be in a perfect future, animal existence without suffering. So that's an answer. However, it doesn't answer the question of why now. Going back to the virus analogy, in a sick body or sick world, the necessary functions for survival must still occur, even when suffering comes as a result. The allowance of this suffering is actually the only way that the whole body, or in this case, the whole living world, can collectively advance into any kind of future. But the most important thing to note that unfortunately wasn't noted in the video is that Christ himself suffered. And this is not my opinion. This is ancient history's most documented fact. And of all the non-Christian historians who mention Christ's suffering, the most interesting is certainly Thales. Why? Because he was alive while Christ was crucified and lived in the exact same place where it all happened. And he writes that a great darkness fell upon the land as Christ was crucified. Guess who else wrote about that. Again, when it comes to animals, when it comes to human suffering, Christ himself suffered. Your own mother watching you die, all of your friends watching you die, whipped 40 times, spat at, he was slapped, beaten horrendously. He was forced to carry his cross uphill, and then nails were driven through his hands and feet to hang him on wood, and did it all completely and utterly innocent.
My next claim is that God commands genocide in the Bible.
I'll let Elijah speak on this one because shout out the bro. He did very well.
I disagree. I love to look at the case of the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15.
Sure.
So 1 Samuel 15, it says, he uses that phrase, every man, woman, child, and then the lists off the animals,
Yep.
right? So we presume that by the end of that, if only Agag and the animal comes back, that they're all dead.
And then they show up
Right.
later
Again,
in the chapter. Yeah.
chapter 27 and in
Yep.
chapter 30. Even King Agag, his descendants come up in the book of Esther.
Yes.
Right. So, like, if we're saying, just for example, we have verification that there are children related to the Amalekites who must have been there because it's Agag's children. Where else would they be? And they're alive because his descendants go on through Haman, which comes up in Esther. So,
Yeah. Okay, but you think that God definitely commanded the killing of?
no, I don't think. I think that's hyperbolic phrasing. And I know I've heard you say it before. I heard you talk about this. You've heard that before, that it's hyperbole. But I think you can demonstrate it in Babylonian, Sumerian writings. Very similar.
Yeah.
There's an Egyptian stele which says that Israel was wiped out and their seed was utterly removed.
Yeah.
It was gone. And so we've got like comparable phrases used in other ancient Near Eastern communities in their historical texts that talk very similarly, but like we know that the Jews persisted to exist in Israel, even though the Egyptians said that they were no more. And that text explicitly says man, woman, and child.
A lot of what Elijah took was from a video that had been released by Gavin Ortlund. So I'd encourage, if anyone wants to go deeper into that topic, to watch that video.
My next assertion is that Jesus never claimed to be God.
I'm going to keep it real with y'all. This is going to be the shortest section because it's the easiest to debunk.
Jesus' death.
Okay, so do we have a better source for knowing what Jesus actually claimed than the Gospels?
No, we don't.
Okay, so I want to focus entirely on the Synoptic Gospels because those seem to be the one that you think are the most shaky on this.
In every single one of the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus accepts the claim of being called God or claims himself to be God. Jesus does this by calling himself the Son of God, and those who eventually murdered him knew exactly what he meant. In fact, part of their formal accusation against Jesus was that he was claiming equality with God. If you're the son of a human, your nature is human. If you're the son of God, your nature is God. In Christian theology, this is called the incarnation. Jesus is the son of Mary, so he's fully human, and he's the son of God, so he's fully God. And this gets into the theology of the Trinity, and that is deeply important to Christianity. This is why when Alex goes, well, he's not claiming to be in equality with Yahweh, well, obviously, obviously that is what's being claimed.
My next claim is that there is insufficient evidence to believe in the resurrection.
The resurrection, as you know, is the single most important issue in Christianity. If it doesn't happen, as Paul would say, then none of this matters. If it did happen, then everything matters and everything becomes much more important. Do you believe that the disciples of Christ, Paul as well, and others, believed that Christ rose from the dead?
I think that's probably the case.
Okay, so you believe that they truly believe, not that they just made it up.
But can I ask why you believe that they believed it?
Sure. Well, I would say they believed it because it happened. That's
okay, fine. But how do you know that they actually believed it?
How do I know that they believed it?
Yeah, how do you know that
Through
they
their
believed? How do you know that
writings.
they weren't lying, for example?
Because they were executed for it. So,
how,
for instance,
how were they executed?
some of them were executed by being sawed in half. Some of them were executed by being beheaded.
How do you know that?
Well, through obviously the tradition and the historicity of the church.
Well, those are two things. There's tradition and there's historicity.
Well, no. So the tradition of the church, the idea is that when you say church tradition or holy tradition, it's not just this idea that, oh, we're just saying things and making things that are in line with Christianity.
Sure.
But it's actually this idea that we are following the trail and the lineage of Christianity closely.
What I'm looking for is evidence of the apostles' martyrdom for their claim that Jesus had risen from the dead.
The evidence is quite overwhelming. We have at least 7 apostle martyrdoms mentioned within 200 years of Christ's disappearance, and multiple of those are written very early by Christian elders who personally knew the apostles.
Only 2 disciples' deaths are recorded in the Gospels. There's Judas, who hangs himself, or there's another contradiction. He either hangs himself in Matthew, or in the book of Acts, he's described as falling over in a field and his headlong and his guts spilling out, right? It seems to be a difference. So Judas, also James, the brother of John, who's beheaded by Herod. We're not told precisely why.
That's not true. It's a sneaky little lie, but a significant one. We are told exactly what motivated the killing of James. Persecution based on what religious authorities perceived as heresy. The reason that Alex is fighting hard against this is because he knows what it means if the apostles were murdered due to their faith that Christ rose from the dead. Because thinking that there is some random no names in society that now have such a huge following of individuals who also knew about their master and are claiming that that guy who died a few days ago, no, he 100% is alive again. We literally saw the marks that the hammer and nail left on his wrists and his feet. Then there's only 2 options. Either they saw some sort of evidence and it was very convincing for all of them that he rose from the dead, or they're just had a group hallucination all at the same time with the same duration for the rest of their lives. But don't just take my word for it. Take Alex's.
Now, you can't historically prove a resurrection, but you can historically prove events and then ask what the best explanation of those facts is. So people will often point to the fact that there was a man called Jesus walking around morally teaching people who was crucified by the Romans, and that a few days after his death was seen, or people made claims that they'd seen him after he died. How do we explain the fact that this man gets crucified by the Romans and then people claim to see him after he died? And we're willing to be put to death for that belief. Now, okay, maybe he didn't die. Unlikely. As they say, the Romans knew how to kill people. Okay, so likelihood is that he was actually crucified. And then a few days later, people are claiming to see him. Maybe they're lying, but then you don't tend to go to death for something you know to be a lie. You're willing to be put to death for things that you think are true, that are false, but very rarely are people willing to die for beliefs that they don't actually believe themselves. That doesn't really happen. So they probably weren't lying. As maybe they were mistaken.
Fooled.
Yeah. Now, I've known you since about 2019, which is probably, it would have been slightly longer than Jesus was with his disciples, but imagine spending every single day with this person, living with this person, eating with this person, and then you've only seen him a few days ago. And somehow, imagine somebody managed to convince you that they were me. Even if I had a twin brother, they probably wouldn't be able to convince you that it was me. Or maybe they were hallucinating in groups. One of the earliest New Testament sources is the letters of Paul, the earliest. And in one of those letters, Paul refers to Jesus having appeared to 500 people at once. And in some of the Gospels, you get at least some group appearances, at least more than one person, and sometimes, groups of the 12 all seeing Jesus all at once. You don't get group hallucinations like that. And so it doesn't seem like they were mistaken either. And so if they're not mistaken, they're not making it up, what explains the fact that these people claim to see him after he had died?
Every single other death of the apostles relies solely on church tradition. There is no historical evidence that they were martyred, and certainly not that they were martyred for their belief that Jesus was resurrected. In fact, even according to church tradition, the only person, the only disciple, the only apostle that was not martyred for his faith, do you know who it was? John, the one who makes the most theologically fantastical claims of all of the apostles.
But obviously we know that also by the tradition that they tried to kill John by boiling him in oil.
I don't see any evidence that this actually happened outside of church tradition, and I don't trust that church.
But so for instance, what type of evidence would you be expecting to hear by people who do not care about those Christians? So for instance, the people in power in Rome, why would they be writing some, incredible long tales about we are going to kill the Christians because of this, and this, so that we can.
This goes both
now
ways, right? Why would the enemies report these martyrdom stories?
Right, exactly.
I could say, why wouldn't Christian writers be motivated to make such stories up? What I'm saying is that goes both ways. We don't know what actually happened. All we have is a tradition, a biased tradition that seeks to establish their martyrdom that tells us that that's what's happened.
But we can know that they wouldn't want to just make this up because some of them also were killed. And when we now track that time later, there are saints in the 200s, 300s, 400s that are killed for having this thing.
But crucially, they're not the eyewitnesses. They're not the people who supposedly saw this happen. So they could easily just be mistaken.
Agreed. But what I am saying is that if those people in the 200s, 300s, 400s are saying that the eyewitnesses were killed, and they are holding to this same faith, and they are willing also to be killed, do you not think that this says something?
If indeed that is what happened, it means that they heard that the disciples died for their beliefs. That's all we can know. We don't know whether that's true. We don't know whether that's...
Yes, but
by the way,
I'm not saying
that they didn't.
Right.
I'm just saying that we don't know. In other words, I'm happy to just grant that the disciples did believe in the resurrection of Jesus and that they died for their beliefs. What I'm saying is that when people throw this out as if it's a historically attested fact, it's simply not.
A 1965 Oxford study estimated that over 3,000 Christians were killed for their faith between the years 303 and 305. And this leads to a crucial point that dismantles Alex's distrust, accusations of bias, and claims regarding what is or isn't historical fact. Remember how I said we have multiple sources mentioning the apostles' deaths in the first 200 years of Christian history? Well, it's not for another 100 years later that the Roman Empire finally puts a stop to Christian persecution within their walls, marking a time where only afterwards can power, greed, or bias be an even remotely believable motive for some Christian writers in regards to Christian martyrdom. So when you have tens of thousands of Christians killed for their faith in the first 300 years, and multiple of them mention that within those tens of thousands, 11 of them were Christ's apostles, and the book of Acts, a source of evidence, outlines multiple assassination attempts on those apostles, and there's historically accepted cases of men who personally knew the apostles being martyred, then Alex's question begging goes from strange to unjustified. By the way, because this was a part that I never got to mention, Christ said that he was going to die and rise from the dead. This is a big point in terms of the resurrection that would have been nice, obviously, if I recalled in the moment, that Christ literally predicted before that he was going to be resurrected dead and told it to multiple witnesses. So what happened on Easter morning?
I don't know.
There's only one other option other than obviously that Christ rose from the dead. I would ascertain, and you can disagree if you feel free, it would be that his disciples, people who truly loved him, stole his body and somehow disposed of it.
Well, it could have been somebody else who stole the body.
But what motivation would they have to steal the body and dispose of it?
Grave robbing was quite popular in that time.
But there were guards, remember?
Around that area. Well, there are guards that are only reported to Matthew. And what does Matthew say about the guards? He's the only person that reports the guards. And what do the guards do? They say that Jesus has disappeared, and the high priests pay the guards to tell people that the body's been stolen. Now, what does Matthew say? He says, and this is a rumor that they went and spread that persists to this day. So the author of Matthew knew that there were people who were saying that somebody stole the body and intentionally puts these guards there, has this story.
Appeal to ignorance. Matthew put the guards there. Okay, I say the guards were there, and Matthew's just noting that they were there.
Of the high priest paying them off to spread this rumor in order to combat that rumor. So we know that people in the early church, before the writing of the Gospel of Matthew,
weren't in the impression
thought that the body was stolen. There's even, Tertullian talks about, this is amazing, Tertullian talks about a theory that some people were spreading that the gardener had stolen the body of Jesus because he didn't want people to come and spoil his lettuces when they came to see him as a shrine.
And I would agree that both seem illogical. Mm-hmm. But if we're just going to say that it was robbed, and then these disciples, this group of people, now are just not looking for the body, or that, again, which I would say is even more unlikely, that it is people who someone who did not care about Christ that now would steal his body. I feel like this would be also very illogical.
Well, there are theories that are suggesting, for example, that the authorities, either the Jewish or the Roman authorities, didn't want this to become some kind of shrine to believers of Jesus to go to after his death, and so they disposed of the body. There are all kinds of theories. Some people think that the body was eaten by dogs. Like, there's all kinds of things that could have happened, which seem pretty spurious and unlikely. But to me, if you're trying to tell me that a man rose from the dead, you're going to have to do a lot more in the way of getting rid of these other...
It would be the only clause that has an external force. Every other clause is also extremely illogical, but the clause where Christ raised from the dead has that external force, and that external force is God.
Can you tell me why?
Pause, guys. That's time.
Side note, I don't know whose idea it was to make up that I got voted off. Like, I don't think I'm breaking any NDAs to tell y'all that they edited that to try and make it look like I got voted off, but I did not. This gets into the point of this printed press mentality, obviously of today, which makes sense. The printed press has been around for hundreds of years and informs both about modern history and ancient history. However, the problem is that with assuming levels of evidence for things that led one or two or three big scribes to write about them and to note them, well, the problem is that you don't have the printed press before the 15th century. And so if in ancient history, you're still speaking about it as if you're expecting multiple sources from different perspectives, points of view, that is being copied a specific amount of times, that is covering a specific amount of details, you're running into problems. And obviously, I'm not just talking about this for Alex. I think a lot of us just in our minds end up doing that, not even just about Christianity, religion, but about a lot of things. I mean, it's still obviously true even for today, even for history that is occurring in this moment, right? We often will trust things that maybe we shouldn't trust, or we won't trust things that maybe we should trust. But I think that a huge point of this conversation, and what I was literally about to say before he interrupted me, was that at the end of the day, oral tradition was the way of noting things. This was the primary way of keeping information of the ancient world, whether that be from generation to generation or from place to place, was orally, was memorization. There were individuals, many of them in the ancient times, who would memorize from young ages vast amounts of information because that's what it was. Today, because we have our phones in our pockets and, we got ChatGPT running and everything, like because of that, we can't even fathom that that's possible. And so part of the problem with the printed press state of mind is that it leads one to be simply academically inclined. Being academically inclined is important. It's good. It's beautiful. But to be simply academically inclined, you're losing yourself. How much academics can you have? How much do you think that the person who knows the most about the world knows? How much? It's still going to be a speck. But that speck includes Mendel, Galileo, Carl Jung, Newton and his laws, Lionel Luckhoo, the fact that DNA is a code, the fact that the Big Bang requires space, time, and matter to come into effect at the exact same time, inferring a spaceless, timeless, matterless entity to cause it, when now the most famous human being to ever live says, oh, by the way, yeah, that's me. You have to take him seriously. And then when he says, oh, by the way, I'm going to die and resurrect, you have to take that seriously. And then when he does it, you have to obviously take that seriously. But if you doubt that he did that because it's unbelievable, when all of his best friends say, no, that's actually what happened, you should probably take it seriously. Is saying it doesn't really matter what your opinions are. And by that, what I mean is even if you hate the religion, even if you hate Christ, even if you hate the people of Christ, you're still invited. Now, that invitation, for it to be taken seriously, again, from a logical perspective, it can't just be about logic. Because this is about a personal, transcendent God that was the one who was necessary for logic to begin in the first place, for consciousness to begin in the first place, then you can't expect for it to be simply about the academia. It has to be about faith. It has to be about the experience of God. So the invitation is the experience. The uncomfortable truth is that most of us are addicted to the insanity of the world, and that's understandable. It's everywhere. But a low attention span, brain-rotten, dopamine-drugged, printed press state of mind isn't going to fix that. Only love, only meaning, only life can do that. An atheistic philosophy self-admittedly can't even give an account for it. This isn't something that this YouTube video, any other YouTube video, any Instagram reel, or even a book can give you. This isn't even something you can give you. This is something that can only be experienced. Because whether the end of the world has come, or one day it's simply the end of your world, the invitation is available now.
Then I woke up.